It all started, like these stories often do, with me just trying to find a decent place to live. I was in my third year of law school in California, so my life was basically a frantic, caffeine-powered loop of classes, study groups, and mock trials. Free time wasn't real, and money was always tight. After weeks of dodging scams, I found it. Not perfect, but close. A one-bedroom in a small 8-unit building. The rent was a steep $3,000 a month, the absolute max I could afford, but the location was great. Under California law, that meant the security deposit could also be $3,000, so I had to scrape together a staggering amount of cash, just for the keys. For a student on loans and a part-time library job, that number was monumental. It was months of savings, skipped meals, and zero social life. My landlord's name was Mr. Peterson. On the surface, he seemed professional enough. He was probably in his late 50s, wearing clothes just a little too nice for the building he was managing, which really should have been my first red flag. He had this air of smug satisfaction, the kind you see on people who think they're the smartest person in any room. He gave me the grand tour, pointing out the apartment's features, like the laminate countertops were hand-carved marble. I signed the lease, handed over cashier's checks for the deposit and first month's rent, and became the model tenant. I knew the law, sure, but I was also just a considerate person. Rent was paid on the first of every month, no exceptions. I never had a party, never made noise, and kept the apartment pristine. When the bathroom faucet started dripping, I didn't. Just call him. I sent a polite email with a video and a clear description. It took him 3 weeks to send a plumber. I treated that apartment better than my own car because I was painfully aware of the $3,000 he was holding hostage. That deposit wasn't just money, it was my moving fund, my safety net. For 2 years, things were pretty quiet. I'd see Mr. Peterson around, collecting rent or showing a vacant unit. He'd give me a curt nod, his eyes always looking like they were calculating something. The other tenants were a mix of young professionals and older folks. We were all quiet. We'd whisper complaints to each other about how Peterson nickel and dimed everyone and dragged his feet on repairs, but nobody ever rocked the boat. The fear of a rent hike or eviction kept everyone in line. As graduation got closer, I landed a job at a great law firm in another state. This was it, the moment I'd been working for. All I had to do was pass my finals, pack up, and move on. I gave Mr. Peterson my formal 30-day written notice, exactly like the lease said. He got it with that same smug smile. "All right, kid, make sure you leave the place clean," he said, like he was giving me some profound piece of wisdom. Leave it clean? I was obsessed. That last week, when I should have been cramming for my hardest exams, I was deep cleaning that apartment with a manic energy. I spackled and painted every single nail hole. I scrubbed the oven until it shined. I got on my hands and knees and cleaned the baseboards with a toothbrush. I even rented a carpet cleaner and went over the dingy carpet twice. And because I'm a future lawyer, I documented everything. I have time-stamped videos of me doing all of it. By the time I was done, that place was cleaner than the day I moved in. I was wiped out but proud. I was sure I'd be getting my full $3,000 back. The day of the final walkthrough came. Keys in hand, moving truck packed. I just needed his signature. Mr. Peterson shuffled through the empty apartment, his shoes squeaking on the floors. He ran a hand along the walls, peeked in the oven, and checked under the sinks. He couldn't find a single thing wrong. Not one scuff mark, not a speck of dust. I actually saw a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. "Looks okay," he grunted, taking the keys. "Great," I said, trying to stay professional. "So, about the security deposit. The law gives you 21 days to return it. I've given you my forwarding address. Can I expect the full amount?" He stopped at the door and turned. The mask dropped, and the predator I always suspected was there came out. He let out a short, barking laugh. "The full amount? Kid, nobody gets the full amount back. There's always something. Painting, deep cleaning, general wear and tear." My stomach dropped. "Wear and tear is your responsibility as a landlord," I countered, my voice shaking a little. "And I have video evidence that this apartment is immaculate. I left it cleaner. Then I found it." He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He looked me up and down. A stressed-out student in a cheap suit? He saw weakness. Video evidence? That's cute, he sneered. Look, I've got to repaint the whole unit. The carpets need a professional deep clean. There are admin fees. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if you get $500 back. That's illegal, I said, my voice getting stronger. Under California Civil Code 1950.5, you can only deduct for damages beyond normal wear and tear, and you have to provide itemized receipts. The fact that I quoted the specific law only seemed to amuse him more. It was like a gazelle lecturing a lion about jungle etiquette. Listen to Mr. Law School, he mocked. You've got your little books, your little codes, I've got the real world, and I've got your $3,000. You think a judge is going to care about your little video? It'll cost you more to fight this than you'll ever get back. And then he said the line that sealed his fate. He pushed off the doorframe and took a step toward me. So, he whispered. What are you gonna do, kid? Sue me? He chuckled again, a horrible, grating sound, and walked away, leaving me standing there in the doorway. I was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, clear rage. He hadn't just stolen my money. He'd belittled my intelligence and mocked my future profession. In that moment, all the stress and exhaustion vanished, replaced by a single, crystal-clear purpose. He was right. I wasn't just going to sue him for $3,000. That was playing his game. I was going to play mine. And my game had much, much higher stakes. As I walked out of that building for the last time, I wasn't just a former tenant. I was a plaintiff preparing his case. And Mr. Peterson had no idea he'd just become the sole focus of a very motivated, very meticulous, and very vengeful law prodigy. The first 21 days were a test of my patience. The law is crystal clear. A landlord has exactly 3 weeks from move-out to either return the full security deposit or provide an itemized list of deductions with receipts. I knew Peterson would blow the deadline. Guys like him, dripping with arrogance, always think the rules are for other people. So I waited. During that time, I moved, started my new job, and tried to settle in. But every night I spent 2 hours on what I called the Peterson Project. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about cold, hard legal strategy. I compiled all my evidence into a perfect trial-ready package, the move-in checklist, every email, bank statements proving my on-time rent, and of course the crown jewel, 45 minutes of time-stamped video of that spotless apartment. On day 22, just like I predicted, nothing. No check, no letter, not even an email. He had illegally kept my money without even bothering to make up a reason. It was his first big mistake. Now, I could have gone straight to small claims court. But that wasn't the plan. The goal wasn't just to win. It was to build a case so crushing that his defeat would be absolute. The first step was the demand letter. A demand letter is basically a shot across the bow. It says, I know my rights, you broke them, and this is your last chance to fix it before I sue. But my letter was going to be a work of art, a masterpiece of legal intimidation. I spent a whole evening drafting it. 10 pages. Professional, clinical, and terrifying. I started by outlining my perfect tenancy. Then I detailed the apartment's condition on move-out, referencing my video evidence by the minute and second. As you'll see in the enclosed video, at timestamp 1432, I wrote, the oven noted as greasy on move-in has been restored to a near-factory condition. Then I got to the law. I cited California Civil Code, par of 1950.5 again, but this time I broke it down, subsection by subsection, explaining exactly how he had violated each one. I explained that his failure to act within 21 days meant he had likely forfeited his right to make any deductions. He now owed me the full $3,000, but I didn't stop there. I added the knockout punch. I told him about subsection L of that same code. This is the part bad landlords never read. It says that if a landlord keeps a deposit in bad faith, a court can make him pay the tenant the original deposit, plus up to 2 times that amount in damages. Suddenly, he wasn't looking at a $3,000 problem. He was looking at a $9,000 problem. I calmly explained what bad faith means. It's not a mistake. It's an intentional, dishonest refusal to return money. His mockery, his stated plan to invent deductions, and his total failure to communicate were all textbook examples of bad faith. I was basically handing him the script for how I was going to beat him in court. And here's where I used a new weapon. I wrote, "Your actions also violate the recently enacted Assembly Bill 2801, effective January 1st, 2025. This law requires you to provide photos or video of the unit's condition after I left, but before any so-called repairs, as a basis for any deductions. Your failure to provide this evidence is another clear, willful violation, cementing the case for bad faith." He probably didn't even know this law existed. I was using his own laziness against him. I sent the letter via certified mail with a return receipt, so I'd have proof he got it. Then I waited. 10 days later, I got a response. Not a check. It was a flimsy envelope with a single wrinkled piece of notebook paper inside. A handwritten list of damages. It was almost funny. Full interior repainting, $1,800. Professional carpet steam cleaning, $400. 12 hours of general cleaning labor, $600. Administrative processing fee, $200. Total deductions, $3,000. Balance owed, $0, no receipts, no photos, no company names. It was a complete fabrication, a pathetic attempt to cover his tracks after my letter obviously spooked him. And best of all, the envelope was postmarked a full 32 days after I moved out. He had just created the single best piece of evidence I could ever ask for. His response was proof of his bad faith. This was when the plan grew. He thought this was a fight over $3,000. I was about to make it a fight for his entire business. I logged back into my university's legal research databases, but I wasn't looking at tenant law anymore. I started digging into property records for his building. It was owned by Peterson Properties LLC, with him as the sole member. No surprise there. I found the original mortgage he took on the building. It was huge. I also found 2 other liens, already on the property, one from a contractor he'd stiffed, and another from a credit card company. This was the key. Mr. Peterson wasn't just a greedy landlord. He was financially over-leveraged. He was using security deposits to stay afloat. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's when I found it, the abstract of judgment. In California, when you win money in court, the judgment is just a piece of paper. But you can take that judgment to the county recorder's office and file an abstract of judgment. Once filed, it becomes a judgment lien that attaches to any real estate the debtor owns in that county. A lien is a cloud on the title. It meant he couldn't sell the building or refinance his mortgage until he paid me. And every day he didn't pay, the judgment would accrue interest at 10% per year. My little $9,000 claim was about to become a permanent, ugly stain on his most valuable asset. And given his shaky finances, I had a feeling one more weight might be enough to bring the whole thing crashing down. I had the evidence. I had the law. And now I had the strategy. Next stop, court. Not just to get my money, but to get the judgment, to get the piece of paper that would let me lay siege to his castle. Hey, just a quick interruption. If you're enjoying this story of sweet revenge, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps out. Also, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next, because this is where things really kick into high gear. Okay, back to it. Eerie motivated, very meticulous and very vengeful law prodigy. Prepping for small claims, court felt like studying for finals, but with an adrenaline rush no amount of coffee could match. This was real. But I had an advantage. I was more prepared for this $9,000 case than most lawyers are for a $100,000 one. I organized my evidence into a binder, tabbed and labeled. Exhibit A, the signed lease. Exhibit B, bank statements. Exhibit C, my 30-day notice. Exhibit D, a USB drive with the 45-minute move-out video. Exhibit E, the transcript. Exhibit F, my demand letter. Exhibit G, the certified mail receipt. And the crown jewel, Exhibit H, his fraudulent handwritten list of deductions, complete with the postmarked envelope proving it was late. My story was simple. I was a model tenant who was robbed by a landlord acting in bad faith. My case was an open and shut slam dunk. The day of the hearing, I flew back to California. I walked into the small claims courtroom feeling calm. The judge was a woman who looked like she'd heard every excuse in the book and had zero patience left. Mr. Peterson showed up a few minutes late. He wasn't in a suit. He was in a golf shirt and slacks, looking annoyed, like this was all a huge waste of his time. He wasn't carrying a binder. He wasn't even carrying a folder. He had a single crumpled piece of paper, his pathetic list of damages. He shot me a dirty look that said, "You're going to regret this." He had no idea. When our case was called, the judge looked at my filing, then at him. "All right, this is my name versus Peterson Properties, LLC. Plaintiff, state your case." I stood and calmly told the story, presenting each exhibit as I went. "Your Honor, I was a tenant for 2 years. I always paid on time. Exhibit B, I gave proper notice. Exhibit C. When I moved out, the apartment was cleaner than when I arrived. I have video of this. Exhibit D." I then walked her through the 21-day rule and the evidence of bad faith. When I sent a formal demand letter, Exhibit, he responded with this. I placed his handwritten note on the podium. Exhibit H, a list of fabricated charges with no receipts, sent well after the legal deadline, in a clear attempt to keep money that wasn't his. He even charged an illegal administrative fee. This, Your Honor, is the very definition of bad faith. He dared me to sue him, so I did. I'm asking for the full $9,000 in damages. I sat down. It took less than 10 minutes. The judge looked over my evidence, then turned to Mr. Peterson. "All right, Mr. Peterson, your turn." He sauntered up. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The kid left the place a mess. It needed a total repaint. The carpets were filthy. I have a list of the costs." He slid his crumpled paper over. The judge glanced at it and pushed it right back. "Mr. Peterson, where are the receipts?" he stammered. "Well, I did some of the work myself. My guys handled the rest. It's standard procedure." The judge leaned forward. "Standard procedure is to provide receipts. Do you have them?" "No, but, Mr. Peterson, did you provide this list or his deposit within 21 days? He shifted his weight. "We were busy." "That's not what I asked," the judge said, her voice like ice. "Yes or no? Did you comply with the deadline?" "No, Your Honor." "And did you, as required by the new law, provide any photographic evidence of these so-called damages before you began your work?" He looked completely lost. "Photographic evidence? What are you talking about?" The judge sighed. She looked at me, then at him. It was over. "Mr. Peterson, ignorance of the law is not a defense, especially for a landlord. The evidence here is overwhelming. You failed to meet the deadline. You failed to provide receipts. You failed to provide the required photographic evidence. You manufactured charges only after getting a demand letter. This is a textbook case of bad faith." She picked up her gavel. "Judgment for the plaintiff for $3,000 for the deposit. Furthermore, the court finds the defendant acted in bad faith and awards the plaintiff the maximum statutory damages of $6,000. She slammed the gavel. "Total judgment, $9,000 plus court costs. Pay the man. Next case." Mr. Peterson just stood there, his mouth hanging open, his face turning a pale, sickly white. The smugness was gone, replaced by pure shock. He thought he was swatting a fly. He walked out with a $9,000 judgment against him. I calmly gathered my binder, nodded to the judge, and walked out without looking back. I didn't feel euphoric. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction. Stage 1 was complete. He thought this was the end. For me, it was just the beginning. I had my judgment. Now it was time to turn that paper into a weapon. The very next morning, I walked into the county recorder's office with the certified judgment. I walked up to the clerk and said the words I'd been waiting months to say. "I'd like to file an abstract of judgment." The clerk stamped the document. I paid the fee, and just like that, it was done. A $9,000 lien was now officially attached to Peterson Properties, LLC, a public record, a cloud on his title. It didn't mean I owned his building. Not yet. It meant he couldn't sell it, couldn't refinance it, and couldn't get another loan against it until he paid me what he owed, with 10% interest compounding annually. My little lien was now sitting right next to the bigger ones. I knew he was financially fragile. I had just added another weight to the heavy bar on his shoulders, and I had a feeling it was about to be the one that finally crushed him. For 3 months, nothing. I didn't expect him to pay. His ego wouldn't allow it. He probably thought he could just ignore the judgment. He was wrong. A judgment lien is a patient predator. It just sits and waits. The call came on a Tuesday. Unknown California number. I put it on speaker. Hello? Is this my name? The voice was strained, angry. It was him. This is he. You have a lot of nerve, kid, he spat. I'm trying to refinance my building, and the bank says there's a $9,000 lien on it. From you, you need to remove it. Now. I leaned back in my chair. The squeeze was working. There's a misunderstanding, Mr. Peterson, I said calmly. I don't need to do anything. A court ordered you to pay. You didn't. The lien is the consequence. It's not coming off until the judgment is satisfied in full. Satisfied? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the $9,000, plus accrued interest, plus the filing fee. Send a cashier's check. Once it clears, I'll file to have the lien removed. Simple. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, his rage fighting, with the terrifying realization of his predicament. I'm not paying you a dime over $3,000, he yelled. The time to argue was in court, Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice turning to ice. You lost. The judgment is final. And every day you delay, it grows. 10% interest is a powerful thing. Pay it and this is over. Don't, and that lien stays right where it is, blocking you from accessing any of your property's equity. He started screaming threats and insults. I just listened. When he was done, I said, let me know when the check is in the mail, and hung up. I knew he wouldn't pay. Pride. And my research told me he probably couldn't. That refinancing wasn't a choice. It was a lifeline. He was trying to pull cash out of the building to pay other debts. My lien had just jammed the gears of his entire financial machine, and that's when a new, much bigger idea hit me. What if I didn't just want the money? What if I wanted the building? I spent the next few weeks digging. I contacted the contractor with the other big lien. Peterson had hired him to repave the parking lot and then refused to pay the $30,000 bill. The picture was now clear. Peterson's business was a house of cards. The building was mortgaged to the hilt, and he had creditors lining up. My little lien in this context wasn't so little. It was the final straw. It was the proof his primary lender needed to see that he was a bad risk, a borrower who didn't pay his debts and whose main asset was now tangled in liens. His desperate attempt to refinance was his last shot, and my lien blocked it. I started checking the county records like a hawk. And then, 6 months after our court date, there it was, a notice of default. The bank was foreclosing. My lien hadn't directly caused it, but it had been the catalyst. It blocked his only escape route, and now his time was up. The property was scheduled to be sold at a public auction in 90 days. My heart was pounding. This was the opportunity of a lifetime. The 8-unit apartment building was going to be sold to the highest bidder on the courthouse steps. I know what you're thinking. How could a recent grad afford an apartment building? I couldn't. Not alone. But I had a few things going for me. A great new job, a perfect credit history, and intimate knowledge of the property. I also knew that foreclosure auctions, which demand cash, scare off a lot of investors. I spent the next 2 months in a frenzy. I put together a business plan, ran the numbers, and took it to my bank. I pitched a high-risk property loan. They were skeptical, but I was a lawyer now. I made my case. And to my shock, they conditionally approved me for a loan big enough to make a real bid. The day of the auction was the most nerve-wracking day of my life. It was on the steps of the same courthouse where I'd won my judgment. I was surrounded by a dozen seasoned investors. And then there was me, a 20-something in a suit, looking completely out of place. The auctioneer began. The opening bid was the bank's debt, $1.2 million. My heart hammered. My loan was my absolute limit. The bidding started fast. 1.25, 1.3. I stayed quiet, letting them fight. It slowed at $1.4 million. It came down to me and one other guy. 0.45 million, he said, smirking. This was it. Near my limit. My hands were slick with sweat. 1.45 million, the auctioneer called. Going once, going twice. I raised my paddle. My voice was a croak. 1.46 million. The guy looked at me surprised. He talked with his partner. They shook their heads. He was out. $1,460,000, the auctioneer boomed. Going once, going twice. Sold to the young man in the suit. It was over. I did it. I just stood there, stunned, my hand trembling. I had just bought the building owned by the man who had stolen my security deposit. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork. Then it was official. I owned the building. My $9,000 lien was wiped out by the foreclosure. But it didn't matter. It was never about the money. It was the key. There was one last thing to do. Mr. Peterson, in a final act of denial, was still living in the penthouse unit. He was now, technically, my tenant, a tenant not paying rent, so I did what any landlord would do. I hired a process server and drew up an unlawful detainer action myself, an eviction. The irony was so thick you could taste it. I wasn't there when he was served. I didn't need to be. I can only imagine the look on his face when he was handed an eviction notice signed by the kid he'd laughed at. He didn't fight it. A few weeks later, he was gone. The first thing I did as the new owner was meet with the other tenants. You could see the fear in their eyes. They expected the worst. Instead, I told them their leases would be honored. I hired a professional, ethical property management company. And then I announced a 5% rent reduction for all of them as a thank you. The relief in that room was one of the best moments of this whole saga. I kept my old apartment, 3B, as a small office for when I'm in town. Sometimes I just sit in there and think about the chain of events. It all started with a laugh and an arrogant question. What are you gonna do, sue me? He thought it was a rhetorical question. It was a challenge. And I used the very system he thought protected him to take everything. I used knowledge, patience, and the law, not as a shield, but as a sword. He learned the hard way that the most dangerous person to cross is someone with nothing to lose and everything to prove. And the sweetest victory isn't just getting your money back, it's getting justice so profound it changes your entire life.